What if I told you that two former U.S. presidents were once part of the largest drug smuggling operations in American history? You'd probably say I was one of those crazy conspiracy theorists, right? But wait a minute, I want you to take a look at this because there is compelling evidence that suggests that George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton were partners in crime and perhaps the most lucrative and brazen drug trafficking operations in the history of the international drug trade. Now, this goes all the way back to the 1980s after Bush Sr. was head of the CIA and then vice president, and Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. They worked hand in hand with the CIA, Oliver North, and notorious drug smuggler Barry Seal to bring in what official IRS and DEA calculations, along with sworn court testimony, amount to $3 billion to $5 billion worth of drugs into the United States. And this was back in the 1980s, 1981 to 1985. What they did was set up an air base in Mena, Arkansas, where the CIA allegedly brought in plane loads of cocaine and heroin from Nicaragua to be sold in the U.S., much of which ended up in south central Los Angeles, and thus the beginning of the crack epidemic. And for more on that, you can Google search our interviews with Freeway Ricky Ross. Now, this also has links to the Iran-Contra scandal, because a lot of that money that was made from the drug trafficking ended up in the hands of the Nicaraguan Contra rebels, and also helped pay for illegal arms shipments to the government of Iran.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
Now, that's a brave woman right there, independent journalist Sarah McClendon, asking President Bill Clinton about the CIA drug running operation in Arkansas while he was governor under his watch. And notice Bill Clinton, he never denied that it happened. He just said that he didn't have anything to do with it. And I think it's very interesting and rather suspicious that Barry Seal, two of his favorite drug trafficking locations were Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Mena, Arkansas. And it's widely accepted that Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards was paid off big time by Barry Seal to look the other way. But we're supposed to believe that Bill Clinton, as governor of Arkansas, was never bribed. And he had no idea what was going on in his own backyard. Right.
Why is the life and death of Baton Rouge, Louisiana-born drug smuggler Barry Seal still relevant today? The revelations surrounding Seal's involvement with the vice presidency of George H. Bush, the Arkansas governorship of Bill Clinton, secret money laundering dealings with the DEA, and CIA Director William J. Casey's shadow government of the United States paints a clear picture of the evolution of the current corruption that infests the highest levels of government today. In a staff meeting in 1981 with newly elected President Ronald Reagan, CIA Director William Casey said, We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. In the mid-1980s, News Channel 8 reporter Teresa Dickey stumbled onto what would become a goldmine of investigative journalism when she innocently went to report on what appeared to be Governor Bill Clinton's new initiative to bring good jobs to the people of Arkansas. To her surprise, Teresa Dickey gradually uncovered a massive shadow government operation replete with illegal cargo plane modifications for drug running and money laundering that would have huge ties to the DEA. And at the center of that deliberate and illegal operation was Barry Seal, a fearless drug smuggler and gun runner for the DEA and the CIA. Seal had been busted for drug smuggling and worked out a deal with the DEA to act as an informant.
But last night in Louisiana, Barry Seal's enemies caught up with him and killed him. Tonight, 3 men are in custody. NBC's Brian Ross reports that Seal was about to testify for the government once again.
It was Seal who posed as a smuggler and flew into Nicaragua and took these pictures showing Colombian drug dealers and Sandinista officials loading cocaine on his plane.
I came to the table with a background in Air Force intelligence, 8 years during the Vietnam War, worked with the CIA and Air America, and then that led me into contract work with the CIA in an obscure place called Mena, Arkansas, back when Bill Clinton was governor and back when George Bush was the president. And I personally witnessed a complicity between these two men, Bush and Clinton, in terms of transporting cocaine into the U.S. For the purpose of sale to generate money to fight a war. And that war at the time was the conflict in Central America involving the Sandinistas in Nicaragua.
And after the Iran-Contra hearings detailed Oliver North's diversion of funds to the Contras and all of the failed indictments never brought anyone to justice, to this day the banks continue to launder the billion-dollar drug cartel industry's money. And when they are caught, they pay a fine and no one goes to prison. Thank you, Clinton and Bush crime family. Corruption has been largely normalized. Although all of this evidence may seem irrelevant as the statute of limitations has been surpassed, what does it mean to the upcoming election?
What difference at this point does it make?
It means everything. It means innocent people mysteriously died in Arkansas for no reason.
Because of Linda Ives' investigation into the death of her son, she was placed on Bill Clinton's enemy list by White House counsel Mark Fabian. Already, people associated with the case were beginning to die in what amounted to a reign of terror among young people in Alexander, Arkansas.
The crime syndicate operating within the Bush and Clinton families will either be stopped dead in its tracks from entering the executive office once again, or a Hillary presidency will usher in a new age of corruption that will bring the United States to its knees. John Bound for Infowars.com.
And for more on the Mena connection, David Knight joins us now to talk about the unholy alliance between the Bush and Clinton crime families. And no matter how the mainstream media spins this, David Knight, this is not a conspiracy theory because there's documented evidence that supports all this, even though 9 separate investigations were shut down. Tell us more about that.
That's right. State and federal. That happened over a 10-year period. And of course, Darren, this all began back in 1986 in October when a plane was shot down that was based out of Mena, Arkansas. Right. That was Barry Seal's plane that had been using to bring about half a ton of cocaine each month into Mena, Arkansas. And of course, we had connections between Barry Seal and the DEA and the CIA. Look, you have to understand that the CIA's central funding for their black operations has been drug trafficking. That's been the situation that's been for decades. It was centered out of Mena. Many people believe that it's now centered out of Afghanistan, Turkey, but at that time, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was centered out of Mena, Arkansas. And when we look at these players, we have to understand it's not just even the Clintons and the Bushes that are still around today. We've also got people like Robert Gates, who just stepped into the presidential election saying about Donald Trump that he was beyond repair on national security issues, to which Trump came back And of course, Robert Gates was a Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush as well as Obama. He served 2 years under one, 3 years under the second. And Trump came back and said, well, I've never met former Defense Secretary Robert Gates. He knows nothing about me, but look at the results under his guidance. A total disaster. And he's right. Our foreign policy under Gates, under Obama and Hillary Clinton and George Bush have been a total disaster. Yet Robert Gates goes back to Iran-Contra himself, Darren. He was the deputy CIA director at the time. And when William Casey died, suddenly under kind of mysterious circumstances, he was supposed to testify in the Iran-Contra affair. The day before he was supposed to testify, the CIA doctor came by his office, examined him and said, I think you got well, he had a couple of seizures, right? They took him in and he says, you got a brain tumor. We're not going to do radiation. We must operate. Casey didn't want to do an operation. He wanted to do radiation. They operated and he never talked again. He died a few months later. Robert Gates took his place as deputy CIA director, but because he was so tainted by Iran-Contra, they knew they could not get him confirmed. So George H.W. Bush put in someone else, but or rather Reagan did. As soon as George H.W. Bush became president, Robert Gates became CIA director as well. So when we look at this, the CIA really is kind of like this inside club. Okay, it's a club that
it's a big
Donald
club,
Trump,
and we're not in it.
That's right. Kind of the League of Extraordinary Drug Dealers is what I like to refer to it as. But it's also concerning when we look at Donald Trump talking to James Woolsey as somebody who's going to advise him on this, because we have to understand that it was James Woolsey who was selling the attack on Iraq hours after 9/11. He supports torture. He wants to have the execution of Edward Snowden. And of course, he believes in climate change and wants to ban fossil fuels. So there's a lot of disturbing factors with any of these CIA directors, but they all come back to connections in one way or the other to drugs. That's the common factor that we see with all of these people.
To drugs, and I think it's very significant going back to the Iran-Contra scandal, because how significant is this? The plane was called Fat Lady, right? And it was a C-123K cargo plane. It was owned by Barry Seal, and it somehow magically resurfaced after he was shot to death in Baton Rouge. And it was shot down over Nicaragua with a load of weapons headed for the Contras. And this is what started the whole Iran-Contra scandal. If it wasn't for that plane being shot down, we might not have ever heard about it.
That's right. And of course, when that plane was shot down, the pilot and the radio man were killed, but Hassan Fous parachuted out. He was captured by the Sandinistas that Reagan and the other people were fighting, the communist Sandinistas. He confessed at the time to being a CIA operative, and then he later recanted that as the U.S. government got him out in just a few months, got him out of jail with the Sandinistas. Somehow he'd been sentenced to 30 years in jail. But we keep seeing this recurring theme. I mean, we could just talk about the planes and how many times we see planes that are loading tons of cocaine and then alternating between that and rendition. Okay, we had even 10 years later in mid-2000s, 2006, we had a plane that had to make an emergency landing in Mexico, loaded with tons of cocaine, and then the pilot and the plane disappear. Well, later we find out that they're doing renditions out of Mexico of people involved in the drug wars. A year later, a plane crashes loaded with tons of cocaine. We learned that that plane had been used for renditions by the CIA for Gitmo prisoners. So there's always this recurring, rotating door between drugs, guns, the CIA, and these planes, as well as the CIA directors who now are inserting themselves at every level into this current election.
And now we know that the Bush family is going to vote for Hillary Clinton, which should
no surprise.
And that should be a big surprise. Well, it's probably a big surprise for a lot of people, but for those of us living outside of the matrix, no surprise at all.
You've often referred to Bill Clinton, and you talked about his relationship with your father and how it developed, and your mother as well, and he's your brother from another mother. What does that make Hillary Clinton to the Bush family?
My sister-in-law.
Interesting.
He thinks of George a little bit like the father he didn't have, and he's very loving to him, and I really appreciate that. I love Bill Clinton.
May all the Democrats forgive me this close to the election. I love George Bush. I do.
So there you go. The Bush and Clinton crime families go all the way back to the 1980s, and now even more recently with the rape of Haiti in 2010. So, and you know, like we're supposed to expect it's all going to change if Hillary becomes president. No way. It'll continue.
Joe Biggs here with Infowars.com. Join us for our live coverage of the upcoming debate between Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton on September 26th. Go to Infowars.com/show for all the live coverage, and also go to the Alex Jones channel on YouTube. Will Hillary wear an earpiece? Will Donald Trump and Hillary actually be on the same stage? Or will they try to do another forum like we've seen before? This is all going to be leading up to our 48-hour long coverage on November 8th of the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and the future of America. Make sure you spread this like wildfire, because we need to get patriots all over the country aligned and ready to stand up and make the changes we need done by voting and getting someone in who will actually take America back and make America great again. This has been Joe Biggs with Infowars.com.